seeing people trickle in here. Yep. I see 4, I see 6.
I see some familiar faces.
Great.
Oh, this is great. Hey, Jen, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm seeing some great people joining in the audience here. This is Michael Young and Chris Matthews. Awesome.
And Michael, I just have to comment, is that a new headshot or photo that you have there? Cause,
it is. I had the opportunity to go co-piloting and flying with a friend of mine here in Southern California. So it's a shot of me trying not to crash.
I like it.
All right. I see we have a decent audience now, and we are just 2 past the hour. So we're going to get started. You can see Téa Romero here on the stage. She will be the lead today for today's one burning question. So I'm just going to get started with today's room. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sophie Johannan, clinical scientist and host for the LinkedIn audio discussion, One Burning Question. As we get started, a few LinkedIn audio helpful hints. Please take this time to use the invite button at the bottom of your screen to invite your friends and colleagues to this event. If you have a lot of followers and want to narrow the search, you can use words like clinical trials or research. Téa Romero will be archiving this discussion, and we will include a link in our summary post on LinkedIn as well as in our LinkedIn group, which is called Clinical Trials One Burning Question. Feel free to tap on profiles, follow me and all of our moderators and panelists here today, and be sure to check out and follow others in the room where inspired. We do encourage audience participation. In the second half of the program, if you find yourself inspired, we do have a couple of questions that were pre-posed, so we will get to those first. If you feel that you want to add to the conversation or have a question, please raise your digital hand. You have that option at the bottom of your screen. You'll also see the emoji button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that to respond if you want to be involved but are not prepared to speak. So I want to welcome all of you to our Clinical Trials OBQ, One Burning Question LinkedIn audio today. My co-moderators and I have designed Clinical Trials OBQ for the clinical trialists, pharma and biotech industry professionals, and patients and patient advocates interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. We hold these sessions monthly, and the next one is currently scheduled for July 21st. Now I'll turn the mic over to my co-moderator, Michael Young, to introduce himself, our sponsor, and lead into this month's OBQ. Take it away, Michael.
Thanks, Sophie. This is amazing to see this tremendous gathering of folks. I think all of you are able to see others who have joined the conversation here, and that's one of the beauties of LinkedIn audio. We've moved to this format a few months ago, and it's proving to be a great place to not only network with one another, but importantly, have a chance to utilize this platform to spread the word and involve ourselves in discussing some things that are really pertinent. As I mentioned, I'm Michael Young, and I'm a life science C-suite consultant. My team and I work at the intersection of clinical strategy and commercialization. I support today's sponsor, Consuli.net, as a fractional CMO, and wanted to take just a couple seconds to share with you a little background about Consuli, our sponsor. So broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company, a B Corp, if you will, and it has a mission to enable individuals who want to participate in the data economy note to you that experts suggest that our individual health data is worth about $20,000 a year. Consuli helps people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, to get them paid for their data while making medicine better. Consuli does this by operating a marketplace for members where Consuli becomes their agent. Members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from Consuli for opportunities, including opportunities to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost to join the Consuli movement, so you can learn more at Consuli, that's CONSULI.net. This month, I'm sure many of you know that June is Pride Month, and today we are going to be discussing the DEI inclusion in clinical research. And our question is, why is it important to include LGBTQIA community in clinical research trials? And what are the consequences if we don't? So today's program has been curated by Téa Romero, and I'd like to turn this over to her now so that she can introduce herself and begin the discussion. Téa?
Thank you, Michael. Hello, my name is Téa Romero. I work at Clario in client relations. I am a client success manager. I'm joined today by Liam, and he comes as a speaker and an activist in this space, and Sienna, and they come from an equal background where they have done research and actual protocol design. So they have a lot of really useful information to add to this discussion. And just for a little bit of background, right now in the U.S., it's estimated that there's 1.4 million adults that identify as transgender. And for those outside the community, it may not appear to be, something that there are barriers around, the LGBTQIA population entering research studies. But we're here to open your minds up a little bit about what barriers are in place and to give you some data around that. We also like you to leave this discussion today with a little bit of curiosity and maybe looking into this further and doing some research on your own. You don't have to take our statements for truth. Do some research and you'll find out. But also, if you are a protocol designer or if you are someone that is doing inclusion, exclusion at your clinic, just, kind of think about who you are excluding and the reasons and rationale behind that. So those are really the objectives of today's talk, and we'll go ahead and get started. I think we'll skip introductions and let the speakers introduce themselves as the topics come up, because we have so much to cover today. So let us get started with Sienna. So Sienna, one of the main points we wanted to discuss is how currently we are excluding in ways maybe we know and in ways maybe we don't know. And we'll start with you, and then you can pass it to Liam.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll do a very brief, I'm Sienna. I use they, them pronouns. I am non-binary, and I'm currently a project manager for cardiac safety, also at Clario. But previously I have worked in several spaces where LGBTQ plus communities have been brought into the conversation. And this is anywhere from, community organizations to protocol design. And so specifically, in my opinion, when looking at protocol design, just as Téa just set this up, there is both, explicit inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then there is the seed I'd like to plant in your mind of if this is even being considered when setting up your protocols. So an area that I personally worked in for study design was human papillomavirus, which is a sexually transmitted disease. And at least for the trials that I was a part of setting up, this was not a discussion that was had at all to discuss essentially any of the letters included in our community and how that would even impact transmission, how we would look at the virus, remaining in the body, looking at clearance. So essentially, this would be used as an example of the conversation was not even had. And so when you then try to look at, as we're going to encourage you all to do today, when you try to go look at comparative research studies or, people out there who are doing the work of comparing inclusion and exclusion criteria, the biggest thing is that often this, because it's not even considered, you're not going to find explicit information of, an exclusion criteria that explicitly excludes, gay populations or transgender populations because they weren't even a part of the discussion in the first place, whereas they definitely should be. And for the reasons why they should be, I think it would be a perfect time to pass that over to Liam to speak a little bit more on that topic.
Thank you, Sienna. So I'm Liam Pascal. My pronouns are he, him. I actually work for a clinical research organization, but a lot of the work that I do is really consulting around transgender inclusion because I am a transgender man. So I have experienced a lot of the discrimination, the bias, and I think just lack of knowledge in healthcare as well as clinical trials. One of the things that I think is huge and why we're not getting the information or getting the participation that we need is that we're just not asking for it, right? So the clinical trials are typically, in my opinion, in my research and my experience, are done through a cisgender heterosexual lens, right? So we're not asking about sexual orientation. We're not asking about gender identity when we are doing these clinical trials. And so if we're not asking, no one's going to tell us, right? Because they don't feel like they're included at all when nothing is being asked about them. I will tell you all very, very bluntly that if I get a request to participate in a clinical trial and I click on the link to start filling out the form, and the only thing I see is, name, age, and sex, male, female, I immediately close it down and I send feedback to the clinical research organization that has sent me that and say, I'm not participating in this trial because I don't feel included, and here's why. I think we don't know what we don't know, and we have to begin by educating ourselves. We can't ever really, hope to understand and realize the full potential and the power that medicine and science has if we aren't trying to understand and recruit and serve and retain all of our patients, specifically those from marginalized communities like LGBTQ+. And when we think about the inclusion, the equity, and belonging in clinical research, it goes beyond engagement and physical health. Mental health is also impacted, and I'm sure you all are aware of all of the anti-LGBTQ legislation that's going on right now across the U.S. That's having a significant impact on us even wanting to go to a doctor, right? And I will tell you, a big portion of the reason why we don't want to participate in clinical trials is because we've got so much distrust in the medical community overall. We feel like there's not enough education, there's discrimination, there's bias. We're having doctors who are telling us, no, we're not going to see you because we don't understand how to work with you, or, well, if you haven't had this particular operation, we can't do anything, or they're misgendering us, using the wrong pronouns. They are calling us by what we call our dead name, our previous name. And in a lot of sites that we go in, if we are participating, there's no gender neutral or all gender restroom. And that is something that is very, very important to us. If we go into a site and the first person that speaks to us doesn't introduce themselves with their pronouns and ask us for ours, we immediately know it's not a safe place. So there are a lot of not only, medical barriers, but practical barriers and things that really, for us, matter a lot in terms of compassionate care. So, I know that was a long-winded response, but trust me, I've been on the receiving end of some of this, and it's not fun.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Liam. And I definitely see a lot of topics there that we could cover. I think something when I was doing a little research into this, there was the HPV trials that we saw where they were purposefully excluding gay males. How do those types of exclusions impact the community, and why would it be an important addition? They've also done their research into this in their, I believe, master's program, Sienna. So, they may have something to add to this. I apologize for the phone ringing, but I'll pass it to you both.
Yeah, I would love to speak to that. As, HPV, I think, is a perfect example in something that does cause, as most of us in the scientific community are aware, it does cause a myriad of cancers in different populations. And so to not be able to be included in clinical trials at all, that is essentially excluding not only a large population that is impacted by HPV, but then a large population of people who would benefit from any treatments that are coming out of this, any, advancements in medicine, and the health and well-being of the community is already impacted significantly by a myriad of factors, most of which Liam has just brought to light in his response. And so those factors are things that need to be considered in research. The designs that we were looking at other social determinants of health, such as, race, socioeconomic status, things like that. And being a part of the LGBTQ plus community is in and of itself a social determinant of health at this point, in their barriers to care, in their lack of safety in their everyday life. And these are things that deserve to be studied, deserve to be taken into consideration, and ultimately, again, end up perpetuating more harm through exclusion in these trials. Liam, do you have anything to add for that?
I think you put it perfectly, but I'm just going to say in the most basic response, to me it just absolutely makes no sense. If you're saying we're not going to include this particular population, this particular community, then that's basically saying we don't care about you, because there's no reason why gay men shouldn't have been included in those studies. No reason whatsoever. And so that's literally saying to one whole community, we don't care. You're not important. We're not trying to come up with new drugs, new treatments for you. We're just going to exclude you altogether. And there's no good reason in all the research that I've done for them to have been left out of that. It just makes no sense.
To add to that point of it not making sense, it actually does not make sense from the perspective of this is a sexually transmitted disease and you're excluding a population based on their sexuality. So if you truly want to look at a sexually transmitted disease and what is happening scientifically from that, it absolutely does not make sense to exclude a population purely on sexual orientation. And in fact hinders, again, not only the research, but being able to help a community that is directly impacted by this.
Well, I mean, that's where we're missing out, and this is the one thing I keep harping on. We're missing out on crucial data that could help really inform effective treatments and interventions specifically tailored to a particular population's needs, right? And so when we do that, that lack of inclusion has led to a lot of adverse consequences for that community, for the transgender community, for much of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yes, it brings me back to you saying earlier, we don't know what we don't know, as it's being set up that way.
I agree, Sienna and Liam, and something interesting with that research was that when they polled, gay men have the lowest vaccination rates. And so, it's definitely a population that needs support and needs some education and understanding behind that. So, very interesting topic. And when we look at things like sexual health studies, me and Sienna were laughing the other day about some of the exclusion criteria that we were looking at on clinicaltrials.gov, purposefully excluding lesbians or gay men from studies. What are some of the concerns you have on protocol, and how can we correct it? Like, how can we look at this differently so that we are including?
This is where I encourage, and my objective here is to plant seeds in that. From what I'm seeing from protocols, I see every day that come through my work. I can tell that this is not even a conversation being had for most protocols out there. They're following, as Liam named earlier, this cisgender heteronormative lens, and there's no reason for that continuation. There's no scientific basis for it. And I think that's what becomes most frustrating is that, looking at scientists doing this and would hope that there would be more of an assumption of this is the way it's always been done, so we're going to continue doing it that way. And more of a lens of, what can we be doing differently, and not just differently, but better. And as Liam mentioned earlier as well, you're missing out on your own data in terms of that. And then, as Liam named his experience earlier, then you look at issues that I know are hot topics in the community of retention and recruitment that are also going to be impacted here. And so I highly encourage anyone who is in a position of, study design, protocol drafting, IRB, anything like that, to really be thinking hard about how this impacts this community. Was it a consideration that was taken? When it was taken, was it done correctly in the inclusion and exclusion criteria? Is there a scientific basis for, an instance where gay men are excluded from an HPV study? As, again, I cannot think of one. I've racked my brain, and I can only think of scientific reasons why they should have been included. And, so there really needs to be, I would really encourage the interrogation of why either the conversation is not being had, or when it is had, what are the results of those conversations that are then being implemented into study design. Liam, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I do want to add something, but I want to come at this from a transgender point of view for a moment, because as I mentioned, I'm a transgender man, and I've had some experiences that I definitely will never forget. And so one of the things that stands out to me is when I'm one of the folks, one of the transgender people, not all of us transition the same way, but I actually take gender affirming hormone treatment, so testosterone injections once a week. And when I started all of this, I met with obviously a primary care doctor, and I had to meet with an endocrinologist. And what we noticed after I started taking testosterone was some things were changing that were not good changes, right? There were some things going on with my blood. My cholesterol shot up. I had never had high cholesterol before. Just some things that were not very normal, right? And my primary care doctor, as well as my endocrinologist, are very, very informed and educated when it comes to the transgender community. They've had a lot of education, done a lot of research. But even then, they couldn't tell me if what was going on was absolutely related to the start of the testosterone usage, the gender-affirming hormone therapy, or if it was something else. They heavily sided with the fact that it was related to the testosterone usage, and I started having to get labs done, blood work done, once every quarter, and really take a look at my testosterone levels and how that was impacting, my blood, my cholesterol, and other things. And I bring that up because it's very scary for someone to be on a treatment like me, right? Because to me, it's life-saving care. I have to have it. If I don't have it, then I don't feel like I can survive, to be honest. And it's a scary thing to not have enough data, to not have clarification around what that particular treatment is doing to your body. And I'm bringing that up because if we're not asking for gender identity, sexual orientation, intersex information, we are missing out on what is going on within these patients internally, right? How is this particular drug that we're trialing going to interact with testosterone or estrogen that someone may be taking if they're a trans person? What kind of safety and efficacy do we have there as it relates to treatment that they may be on or surgeries that they may have had? So for me, it's it's not only a part of being inclusive, it's really trying to understand how a particular medicine or a treatment interacts with what a particular community is already taking on a regular basis. And when it comes to the trans community, there's a lot of unknowns. And I think it's very important that we really try to figure out what's going on in terms of the intake of those medications and how it impacts those patients.
And Liam, when we opened up, you mentioned that when you look at an intake form and it asks for gender, if it just says male or female, you just immediately shut down the form.
Oh, so, absolutely. Absolutely. And I will tell you, most other people do too from my community.
So
I'm not even included in that list.
Could you give the audience an example of what would be acceptable or what you are looking for?
So at the very minimum, and there's a lot that we would love to see included, but I will give you the very bare minimum that we can start with. Gender identity, sexual orientation, and whether a person is intersex or not. Those three things are very important. Now, beyond that, knowing whether a trans person is on any particular gender-affirming hormone treatment, or if they have had any type of gender-affirming surgeries, like myself, I've had gender-affirming top surgery. But at the very minimum, those things are super important, because if you at least get that information, you can ask some questions to determine some other things. But if you're not asking, if all you're asking for is sex assigned at birth, yeah, you're going to immediately have people close down and decide, I'm not doing this. I'm already having to see a doctor on a regular basis, most people anyway, if they're from the trans community. And I'm not going to spend my time and do a clinical trial that really doesn't include me. I don't feel safe. I don't feel like my information is going to be kept private. And it's just not worth my time. It's how we look at it.
I think that is a lot of great points there on how to do inclusion with the intake questionnaire. Are there...
It's kind of like the saying, I'm sure you've all heard, nothing for us without us.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's how we look at it.
And so what are some other tips or things that maybe, since the form is created by a cis kind of lens, what are some other things that maybe people aren't noticing that flag for the community?
I would, I think the list that Liam gave is, again, at the very bare minimum, because, I think these intake forms or, interest forms are extremely important when you're wanting to attract, patients for clinical trials. And so, like I just kind of joked a few minutes ago, I wouldn't even be included if there was only a gender binary on the list. So right out the gate, I can't even check a box and say I would like to be included in this, because there's also my background is in sociology, and I like to say I bring the human side of medicine to clinical trials, because like Liam was saying earlier, the immediate shutdown to not want to engage in that clinical trial is those questions are going to tell the participant right off the bat how they're generally going to feel engaging in this trial. And so, for a person like myself, I would like to see pronouns asked right off the bat as well, so that I know that that's documented off, from the get-go, as I'm not going to participate in a clinical trial if I'm going to be misgendered the entire time. That's just, for my own safety and sanity, that's not something that I'm willing to do. Now, then you get onto the questions that Liam has proposed as well, because these signal to the community whether or not this is a space that they can attempt to step into and feel safe, because it doesn't, it starts at that intake form and will continue through the life cycle of the trial. So you also need, informed site staff, informed, sponsor teams. And so that's why I'm encouraging, even before you're creating these sheets, to be considering this. And so, something that I think is really important is investigating in your organizations, in your communities, who is a part of this community, and their voice matters in things like this and should be given the opportunity to weigh in, be consulted, essentially, to ensure that you are doing what needs to be done to make this community feel safe in engaging in your trials.
One of the questions I just received from the audience, it makes a lot of sense to me, too, is that, this conversation seems to be leaning toward voluntary kind of treatments if someone just wants to do a phase 1 healthy volunteer trial. But what about patients that are, in the terminal stages of a disease and they really have no alternative other than joining a clinical trial? I feel like what Sienna mentioned really would impact their well-being if they're in a state where they have to enter the trial and then to not be included in that questionnaire. Do you have thoughts on that inclusion, Liam or Sienna?
So I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. Are you asking if we meaning our community would still participate even if we didn't see the criteria we're looking for in terms of gender identity, sexual orientation, and so on?
I think that is what the question is meaning. Yeah. But I feel like, when life and death are in in discussion, you're going to go with life, right? But I also feel like it maybe would give you a sense of a negative feeling being in that trial.
It would, and I think, I don't want to speak for the entire community, I can only speak for myself, but it would heavily depend on, what that terminal illness is, and because again, I go back to, and not every trans person takes a hormone treatment, hormone therapy, right? But I am, and it would go back to, well, I don't know how this is going to impact me, knowing that I'm on this gender-affirming hormone therapy. And if they're not asking the right questions, they may not even know that I'm on that hormone therapy, and I'm not going to just automatically give them that information because, again, keep in mind, I've already kind of shut down, right? Because I didn't see gender identity, I didn't see sexual orientation, I didn't see the pronouns, nothing. So I don't know that I would still agree to participate in the trial. I really don't. And again, I can't speak for the entire community, but I would still hesitate.
Well, I think that brings up a good point of how do you build the trust to begin with? How should the researchers be doing an outreach to the community? How should we build that trust so that there is, a safe place there and the community does want to participate?
And it has to start at the very beginning, like when you're even just thinking about the trial and the marketing materials. We have to see representation, right? Mm-hmm. If we're not seeing the questions that we're looking for, we're just seeing sex assigned at birth, and we're not seeing anyone who looks like us in any of the materials, whether they're online, printed, or otherwise. That's the first thing that we notice. Okay, well, I'm not going to participate in this because it's not inclusive of me and my community, right? And so if that happens and we actually, let's say, go to a site, we're also looking for things there. Are we seeing, representation there? Are we seeing people like us? Are we seeing, brochures and posters that include things about our community? Are we seeing gender neutral or all gender restrooms and showers? Is the person who's talking with us, the first person we meet and talk to, are they saying, hey, my name is so-and-so and my pronouns are, what is your name and what are your pronouns? Mm-hmm. If we're not getting the very basic level of respect and dignity and compassionate care, and we're not seeing that from the very beginning, we have already mentally and emotionally checked out and decided it's not for us.
Yeah. To build off of that, again, this is something that starts from, the conception of a clinical trial and follows all the way through past database lock, this is something that needs to be a fundamental change in the clinical trial community because right now the way it is being run is through a cisgender heteronormative lens, and most people in the community already know that, so they're already halfway out the door. They're, so they really need to see something that says, hey, this is for you, so you're looking at gender neutral language on marketing materials, you're looking at, like what Liam mentioned, being able to physically see people who are part of the community, and then, ensuring that the team who is also a part of this trial is educated, is informed, and is dedicated to ensuring that it is an inclusive space through and through the methods that we've both mentioned thus far.
And I'm sorry to continue to add here, but this is something I'm extremely passionate about, as you all can probably tell. I was looking at, we did some research between like July 2018 and February 2022. There were like 116,000 articles that were published reporting clinical trial results. And interestingly enough, there were only 78 studies that reported participation of transgender patients. Now, that's like 0.06%, right, in the grand scheme of things. So that kind of gives you an idea of, we're not asking to get the information, and people aren't telling us because we're not asking, right? So a lot of those trials may have included trans patients, but because we didn't ask for the data, we don't have it. And so it's one of those things, if we could just do, like Sienna said, some of the most fundamental, some of the most basic things, I think we could certainly change how inclusive we are in terms of putting patients first.
Yes, I agree, and I think there has been, a lot of missed opportunities here to include the community, and for sure, the hormone issue can kind of wreak havoc on protocols. I assume that they maybe don't know enough about the hormones, so they don't want to include people that are taking the hormones. But I think, too, the community tends to be targeted for very specific trials, right? Like HIV, AIDS, Hep C. But really, we need to be included in all things, right? It needs to be, your asthma studies, your cardiac safety studies, just all studies impact the LGBTQIA plus community the same as the cis community. So it's important to always have that lens on of how to include in the trials.
Well, and I've done some trainings with some medical doctors, and I will tell you that a large majority of doctors will tell you, look, I wasn't provided with this information when I went through medical school, right? I haven't had this type of training, and that's something that I think there's a huge disconnect, right? We have to have effective site staff training. The medical people that are working in these trials and even in healthcare in general have to get not only foundational training, meaning they understand the terminology, they understand they can differentiate between sex assigned at birth and gender identity, they understand how to use gender neutral language, they commit to no assumptions, meaning you don't look at somebody and automatically assume that person is a boy or a girl or whatever. That is something I think that we are way behind on, is the education and the training of the site staff. And it has to be everybody there, because if one person slips up and says something that's, very exclusive or calls somebody by the wrong pronouns or uses a name that they no longer use, those types of things make people feel like they don't belong. And so I think education is key. And you have to get the trans community, the lesbian, gay, bisexual community involved in this education, because no one knows us like we do, right? We can tell you about what we've experienced. We can tell you about what we need in terms of, medical care, in terms of the care that we've already received or haven't received. And we can tell you how best to support our community. So I think it's a matter of also reaching out, like Sienna said earlier, and working with organizations and people in our community and asking them, hey, how do we go about this the right way? Can you partner with us to tell us what we need to be doing to get the community more involved and to make sure that we are giving them the compassionate care and inclusivity that they deserve.
I agree. And with certain diseases, you have this huge gap there. I believe before this conversation, Sienna and I discussed, breast cancer as one of those key points that if you're not including the entire community, you're risking people's lives, basically. Mm-hmm. So it's a very important discussion. And there is a group I'd like to plug here called Health Professionals Advancing LGBTQ+ Equity, and they are online at www.glma.org, and they are someone that would be very interesting to follow. They are working hard to make the community more visible. Sienna, I'd like to pass it to you. I know you've done a lot of preclinical type work in this area. What are some lessons learned that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think I'm going to kind of use this question to also build off of what Liam was just alluding to, which is that, we are specifically in this space talking about clinical trials right now, but, those who administer clinical trials are those in the medical community at large. And that is where there's a fundamental discrepancy right now in terms of informed care and education. And so it really starts, with the people in the room who are looking to, for example, do a trial on asthma. And, is there someone in the room that would even be taking these items into consideration, would even be thinking about how the population would be included or excluded and why? That these are fundamental conversations that need to be occurring, broadly and kind of at all times where, there are the trials that you would think of maybe more logically because we've been led to, that would include the community. But like Téa also mentioned earlier, the community should be considered in every single clinical trial because right now they're not. And that is the fundamental problem. And that's why we're all being brought here today. And so it takes a concerted effort to be actively unlearning the way that we have been taught thus far to get us to these points in our lives. And so, when I mentioned earlier that I've been involved with study design, I've also been involved in, setting up LGBTQ+ medical fellowships, redesigning survey intake forms for community, smoking cessation programs. So this is really at all levels of the medical field. And so, you want the person archiving, the notes at the trial, the person doing intake, the person administering the items in the protocol. You want every single person to be informed and to be openly having this discussion at all times. So, again, I think the way that we've been taught, where you think of things like, women may be at higher risk because of this, what has led the scientific community to specifically ascribe that to women? Because I think you'll find the more you investigate into the gender binary and the way it's been presented in medicine in general, that a lot of it is not actually based on true, hard, basic scientific things. It's being based on a social construct that's been developed over the course of several hundred years. And so it takes a very concerted effort to start to unlearn that, to make sure that you're truly administering a clinical trial in an ethical way.
Thank you, Sienna. I have a question from Christine, so I'll let her ask. Christine?
Sorry, I was off mute and not expecting that. I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on working with grassroots organizations versus national on, regarding outreach and getting communities involved? Is there the same kind of division that we may see in disease spaces as well here?
Sorry, was that question directed for me?
To any of you either of you on the panel, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Just wondering your thoughts as we're reaching out and really looking to work with groups. Is there preferences? Is there more of working with grassroots? Like, what are you seeing in that space?
So I think there is going to be more of an effort in grassroots organizations, especially ones that are geared for the community, to use marketing I do think it's a good idea to be considering those in terms of outreach and recruitment, because I think grassroots organizations who maybe, are receiving funding from different organizations that aren't at the national level or things like that do also have a little bit more leeway in terms of what they're able to do with, consulting on a study design or marketing materials or things like that. And so I think it's kind of a twofold approach, using those grassroots organizations to be, an avenue for reaching the community, and also using what you're seeing, their tactics as, to be brought back to more national organizations and more institutional studies and outreach. Liam, do you have any more to add for that?
No, I think you definitely covered it there. I do feel that the grassroots organizations are very, very important, and I think we are starting to see people look at those more and more.
Okay, great. And Jennifer has a question. So, Jennifer?
Yeah, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I see I'm lit up. So I'm sitting here in front of me writing a protocol for an autism study that we're planning next year. So it makes me think, especially for young children, 18 and below, this definitely affects them in many ways. The LGBT trans community is certainly prevalent in younger kids. Besides the first obvious question that we've been thinking about under the gender question, because I can easily change male, female, trans, that's kind of an easy no-brainer. I'm wondering what jumps out at you as other ideas to make it more, and again, I do think the marketing is easy. When we think about reaching out to communities, and we try to make it as diverse as possible, because we want all patients, we want patients in these trials. We don't really, we don't usually discriminate in that way. So thinking back to the design of the protocol, what do you think about that I could write to make it more accessible?
I would ask first if there's anything currently written in the protocol that excludes any members of the community.
No, there's not. And that's kind of where I've been struggling with this topic as a whole. As, when I think about cancer protocols, ophthalmology protocols, I don't think I've ever purposely excluded it. We've seen people exclude if you're on high doses of hormones, if there's a scientific reason that the hormones may interact with the drug. And thinking again that the research protocols, and we often don't know that much, sometimes we have to exclude that. And coming back to what Liam said at the beginning, certainly when we start talking to patients, we need to know everything they're on. So if they weren't able to disclose that, then that would be a problem. But otherwise, no, I've never read anything purposely excluding someone. It would be excluding them if they were on a medication that would interact.
So I just have one follow-up question, and then I think this is a perfect question for Liam to answer, which would be, does your protocol only mention men and women when mentioning inclusion and exclusion criteria?
Exactly. That's what I was getting at. Yeah. We typically say males or females, so we could easily say males, females, or trans. Like that's no brainer.
So, or just subjects, or...
Yeah.
Right, but we capture it in the database. So what you're getting at the end is, look, we just get used to modules because the pharma industry is a slow industry to change. So it's just really modules. At the end, we get a report that says X number of males, X number of females. We can have another column that says X number of trans.
Well, I think I'm sorry to interrupt. I think it's important that we clarify what we're talking about specifically, because this is where I think sometimes we get confused on the terminology. Mm-hmm. So there's sex assigned at birth, right? You're born, the doctor says this is a boy, this is a girl, right? There's sex assigned at birth. Then you have your gender identity, right? Does it align with the sex assigned at birth? So there's, cisgender, transgender, non-binary, and so on. And then you have sexual orientation. So it's important that those things are kept separate and that you're asking those questions independently. And it's also a really good practice to have a space for someone to say other and write in what they want to add, or choose not to respond, because there will be people who say, I don't want to answer that question. I am not comfortable yet, because maybe this is their first clinical trial, maybe it's the first time they felt like they were included as a member of the community, and they don't want to give that information. Or it could be because they don't want the person that's with them, maybe somebody's accompanying them, they don't want them to know. So we want to make sure that, one, we're including everything that we should, sex assigned at birth, gender identity, sexual orientation, and then giving them that space to not only check a box, but this time I'm going to choose other, and I'm going to write it in, or I'm going to choose prefer not to disclose.
And I hear you on, matching this to databases and, programs that are already set up that will be used throughout the life cycle of a trial that aren't inclusive of, all of the items that Liam just mentioned, which they should be. So I understand this is a twofold problem. This is something that needs to be changed in the industry at large we need to be able to call on different databases that we want to be able to use that are going to be able to match what we're writing in the protocol, so that they can match the forms used throughout the clinical trial, so that they can match the data, so that, there isn't just all of this information that you're collecting, seemingly for no reason. But, if you have a protocol right in front of you right now, I would encourage you to see what's possible with that. What databases will you be using? What are the capacities of those databases?
The issue comes to the end when we start talking about statistical analysis.
Exactly.
And look, the reality is, this is science, and we have to report this data. And certainly, that's why I think a lot of what you're talking about has to be about kindness, awareness at the site level. From the protocol level, sometimes not so much, because, if we're putting this all into a report at the end, and we submit it to the FDA. So if we have 110 males, 110 females, and 2 unidentified, or cares not to answer, that's a problem for science. So
that's why we're encouraging a larger change, because that is what fundamentally needs to be changed.
100%.
And I understand what you're saying from a practical standpoint. We do statistical analysis, and I understand right now, largely in the medical community, there are limitations in terms of the way that it's been run for a very long time, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be changed.
Right, and part of that, it goes back to, there are really no regulatory guidelines around this community either, right? When you look at the FDA guidelines, for example, it's really, gender identity is really not mentioned, and maybe twice, and I think it's a footnote.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, while we're focusing on race and ethnicity and disability and things like that, they have not yet approached the topic of gender identity specifically. And, we were talking about earlier, I think somebody mentioned, the topic of cancer. Tobacco use is one of the biggest risk factors of cancer, and LGBTQ plus people use tobacco at rates that are 40% higher than the rest of the country. But yet, when we do these trials that, we should be involving them in, we're not collecting that data, right? So we don't know, again, what we don't know, right? Again, that goes back to the importance of being very inclusive of this community when we are doing these clinical trials.
And so I'm hoping to kind of just put a bow on this fantastic part of the conversation that just came out, is that people that are here today listening in and that will listen into this are part of this clinical trial community, are aware of things like limitations when you get to statistical analysis and things like that. And I'm not saying anyone here is going to, go to the FDA tomorrow and get this done, but I am saying that having the conversation, pushing for it, asking for it, that's how things get done in this community, is ensuring that because, people like Liam and I aren't necessarily, we're lucky enough that we're in positions in this community right now to be having this voice, having this platform, to be doing this, but it really takes a community that isn't just, the burden isn't just on the LGBTQ plus community to get this done. It takes a lot of allies as well. So,
And Sienna, I know that, I spoke last year at the Drug Information Association on this very topic. And a lot of the people that were at that event said, we've just never really thought about this. Like how we don't, we don't know what we don't know. And I think, there's a lot of conversations that are taking place. There's data, there's articles that are being shared, and we are seeing it, come up a lot more. But now it's time for, like you said, the community itself, an entire community, to take action. We cannot, overlook and other the LGBTQ plus community any longer when it comes to healthcare and medical research. We've got to take action. We've got to put all patients first, including this community, if we really want equity in healthcare. And so when you think about equity in healthcare, that means everybody has the opportunity to attain their full potential of health, right? And nobody's disadvantaged based on anything. So I think all this talk is great. We're going to continue to have these conversations. They're very good for us to have. But now it's time to really start to take action and say, all right, instead of, well, we can do this, but it's, we can do this and let's look at something else, right?
Yes. And so I know we're starting to get close to time, but, being someone involved in grassroots organizations, exactly what Liam just said, it takes however many people are on this call to then take this back to their teams, to their community, because you never know who someone knows, in terms of, escalating things up the ladder, so to speak, in terms of getting these types of questions and these types of discussion in front of those who can make meaningful change.
Exactly. And I think, to your earlier points, the NIH has very distinctive guidelines around, inclusion, exclusion for race, and for, male, female, but they don't have the same kind of oversight over the LGBTQIA population and their participation. And so something as simple as, pushing for that inclusion, let's have the conversation, let's be included in the DEI, would help out tremendously. I know we have only 2 minutes left, so I will pass it back to Sophie if we want to do like a round robin to see if everyone has a closing statement or an organization they'd like to share to help
Thank you, Téa.
This forward.
Yeah. Racing with so many questions. I have and probably more questions than answers, and I'm not going to actually voice any of them because we're at the end of our time, but just know that you have raised so many flags. So if I'm feeling this way, I'm sure many people in the audience are feeling this way. We're starting to think, our eyes are opened, and it's going to take some time, I think, to process all of this learning. So with that, I would like to hear some closing statements from each of our panelists. I think let's start with Scott and Christine, since we haven't heard from them yet. Scott, do you want to share some closing statement or a question?
Sure, Sophie. Thanks so much. And thank you, Sienna and Liam, for kind of leading the discussion with Téa today and making sure that this is an important piece that we're considering in clinical development. I don't have any remarkable insights to add except as someone who's very focused on making sure clinical trials are appropriate and accessible and patient-friendly. As was pointed out, slow to evolve. I think we're trying to make studies a little more patient-friendly and realistic for families to participate in. And I think you pointed out some very, for us to consider, we need to take this a little step further as well, to not only think about the number of assessments and what's physically possible for someone to do, but also to think about some of the other sensitivities, and that there's a diverse group of people that could be participating, and we might be either intentionally excluding or maybe even unintentionally, offending in a way. And I think we just need to be considering that, and adding another layer on to this patient-friendly approach needs to go a little deeper and a little further. So thanks for broadcasting your message very clearly to this group. I hope that we can all sort of file that away in our brains and take that back to our next studies and make sure that we incorporate that. So thank you both for your voices today.
And I guess that's my cue to step in. I want to first say thank you, Téa. It was a fascinating conversation. I'm involved heavily with the All of Us research program, and just wanted to let people know, too, that they are looking to do things differently, and including questions on sexual orientation, sex assigned at birth, and gender identity in its initial demographic survey with the basics. And then they have a broad range of answer choices. And so it allows the participants to offer a more complete picture of their lives. And it also has resources available to researchers to help them define some of these terms and ensure the appropriate analysis of these elements. So there is a big initiative at the NIH to include this, and just thank you for your perspectives.
Excellent, Christine. And Michael, you've been very quiet. We'd love to hear your closing remarks or any question you might have.
You're cutting out, Michael.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to step in and say, honestly, as the founder of the idea here with OBQ, I am surrounded by just an amazingly passionate group of co-moderators, today's panelists. I couldn't be more proud of all of the programs that we've done over the last year and a half. This has been one of the most disruptive, most questioned, most important conversations that we've had. And I congratulate everybody who's contributed today. Téa, just an outstanding job in curating this and making the message understandable. The only thing I want to say in my closing comment is simply to say that clinical trials and the development of medications are designed for the betterment of all of us. And that's why it's so critical that in the effort to recruit, recognizing that in patient recruitment, we're still only seeing 4 or 5% of the eligible patients actually get into a clinical trial. It is more important than ever to make sure that we are reaching out to all of us inclusively. So thanks to everybody for making this just a really outstanding session. Appreciate that a great deal. Sophie, I'll let you take us out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike.
Sophie, you're cutting out a bit.
Yep.
I did want to ask Sienna and Liam if they had organizations that they would like us to follow.
I actually have several organizations that I would love to share. I don't know if you want me to send those to you via LinkedIn message or email, but I'm happy to do that.
Okay, that would be great. And I will post the recording of this conversation along with those resources. Sienna, did you have anything to add before we close?
No, I'm just really appreciative of everyone who showed up, and again, hope this was a seed planted to then kind of take this wider into the community and see what comes of it.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you both.
It's been a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I hope you take away from this the ability to use your voice and help to create change in the clinical research arena as it relates to inclusion and diversity. And if there's ever any way that I can help you please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm willing to do everything that I possibly can to make sure that we are really putting the patients first.
Thank you, Liam. And please give Sienna and Liam a follow on LinkedIn. Please connect to them. They're very active in this space. And I will close out for Sophie since she was cutting out a bit. So thank you, everyone, and we will close the room.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.